Almost everyone has one unpleasant mindset about a Nigerian estate agent or another due to one experience or two that they've got. So let me ask you, what is your own mindset? What do you generally think of an estate agent, or whenever you hear the name house agent, what comes to your mind? What do you generally think? Why do real estate agents in Nigeria have such a bad reputation? Welcome to the Property Hustle. It is easier for us to zero in on the fact that there are lots of estate agents in Nigeria that engage in a lot of bad practices, and for us to use that to justify why the bad reputation exists. But is that really the end of the story? So I think the problem is not really just about the fact that we have bad agents, right? But the problem is more about the fact that maybe the system, the rental system, the agency system in Nigeria, as it is currently, is capable of creating incentives for bad behavior, for creating mistrust, and make even a good agent to look bad. So what are the issues? What do we really expect an estate agent in Nigeria to do? What are we really paying an agent to deliver? What are the deliverables? For a lot of us, for a lot of people, we think that for an estate agent is just a case of come and get me a property and I pay your commission and you go. But I think that is more like a narrow way of looking at what an agent can actually do or can be. You understand? An estate agent can be seen as a professional that can provide values, such as, providing market information or local market information, or market insights, right? As it can be considered. An agent can be somebody who is engaged in, property valuation because they understands the market, right? An estate agent can be somebody who engages in negotiation, on behalf of the tenant, on behalf of the landlord. It can be a tenant agent, it can be a landlord agent. An estate agent can be somebody who engages in general markets like analysis, for the listing. So now, if we consider that to be some of the things, some of the values that an estate agent should ideally provide, are Nigerian estate agents really providing such kind of value? And are we actually paying them enough for those values, if actually they are providing those values? And when I say we, I'm talking about, the total package cost that most people that we pay to rent an accommodation. How much of that value, how much percentage of that value gets into the pocket of an estate agent in Nigeria? And whatever the response is to, these questions, it doesn't change the fact that estate agents in Nigeria have got this, very, very terrible, very bad reputation before the people that they serve. Talking about the tenants, the landlord, and the general market that they serve. The agents in Nigeria have got those very, very bad reputations. And just to be clear, an estate agent or a property agent is very, very important for the housing market. You have the landlord, you have the tenant, you have the developers, the property sellers, and sitting among or in between these people is the real estate agent. And if the estate agents they perform badly, that means it affects the rental market or it affects the property market generally. You understand? It affects how a landlord is able to get return on their investment. It affects the occupancy of the house. It affects how a tenant is able to get a good accommodation. You understand? And so this is why it is very, very important that we try to get to a point whereby an estate agent, they have a better reputation, because a better reputation for an estate agent would mean a good business for the rental market in Nigeria. So maybe the right question should be, what kind of an estate agent or a property agent do we need in Nigeria? And why does the tenants generally distrust the agent so badly? Why? And for me, I think it's not far-fetched. You have this case of fake listings where an agent just put up properties in the market just to get people to come in, and before you come in, you have to pay inspection fee. And at the end of the day, they take you to a property that does not even exist, all in the name of, paying that inspection fee. You understand? So that is like a very, very sharp practice that some bad agents actually carry out. You understand? You have the case of an agent withholding information, important information. Sometimes the house is even having some issues before the previous tenant left. Those information, those issues, information on those issues, some agents, some bad agents can withhold those information from the tenant. And so at the end of the day, when the tenants begin to live in that house and they begin to discover these problems on their own, that's bad energy, that bad blood, that mindset that the agents are generally bad, creating that kind of bad reputation we're talking about, it kind of crops up. You understand? And then you have all these, fees that you don't even know how they come about, coming up from some agents, some sharp practices generally. So when you look at all those factors, you see that when a tenant distrusts an agent, it's actually justified. So maybe you now see that there's a justification for why the mistrust is there in the first place. There's a justification for why the bad reputation is there in the first place. And that is why there is need for, addressing, or there's need to address some of those challenges, some of those problems with, the agency market, the rental market generally in Nigeria. And so we agree that there are lots of bad agents. But at the same time, the number of good agents that exist supersedes the bad agents. So why do good agents get punished by the actions of the few bad agents? Sometimes a good agent can take their time, take hours and, days to do property sourcing, to get the landlord's property on board, get the tenant to rent the property, do the due diligence, the necessary due diligence, the proper analysis to make sure that the tenant gets a better deal. And somehow along the line, somebody just come along and undercuts this agent. You understand? Like a dubious agent just comes along and undercuts the agent, and probably coming in the form of offering a cheaper services, like collecting lesser fees, right? And so because this dubious agent is offering these lesser fees, the tenant can get so enticed, so interested in that, and this agent that's taking their time, that's taking his time to do all the proper things, now is pushed out of the business, right? Is pushed out of the business, and the tenant even begins to see him as the bad guy, right? And so the tenants now move into the property, just all in the name of lesser fees. Meanwhile, there could just be some information that have been hidden from the tenant. Maybe the house had some problems that pushed the former or the previous tenant out of the house. So this agent, because of the dubiousness, because of the focus just being on just collecting any money and just moving on, now presents this as though the property does not have any problem. And so the tenant gets to pay this money, and by the time the tenant gets into the property, in the course of staying in that property, now begins to realize, to discover some of these problems, the tenant begins to classify all agents as the same, dubious, as the same bad. You understand? Classify all agents as being untrustworthy, as people that lies. And so at the end of the day, you now begin to see that this can now begin to create an incentive for even creating more bad agents, because the good agents now begins to turn bad. Because this, bad agents comes, they give promises that they cannot fulfill. They'll tell the tenants that, don't worry, I will meet the landlord, I will get a better deal for you. Or don't even worry, you'll be able to make this payment today. Do you understand? And so all these things entice the tenants, and the tenants gets to go in and make the payment. And at the end of the day, the revelation begins to come out, and the tenant begins to develop this kind of bad mindset towards agents, towards property agents, towards house agents in Nigeria. And so whether you are the good agents or you are the bad agents, the classification covers everybody. You even have a situation whereby sometimes landlords and tenants, they boycott the agent, right? An agent introduces a tenant to a property, and somehow, because maybe the tenant feels the fees are high, this and that, the tenant goes backward and the landlord accepts the boycott. You understand? And so they boycott the agent. There's no communication between, the agent is no longer in the picture. You understand? So they carry out the transaction and everything goes smoothly. Now, if eventually this agent gets to know that, oh, I have been sidelined in this deal, no matter how good the agent is, gradually the agent can, begin to develop some bad traits. And so we now begin to have more bad agents in the market. So I think there are so many practices that, creates that incentive to that creates that room for even the good agents to become bad. So that this, umbrella bad reputation that we're talking about, it now covers everybody. And then another issue is landlords, why does landlords and the agents always don't trust each other? You see, you can have landlords thinking that, the agents, their own is just to come and, collect their commission. And the agents might think, oh, the landlord does not even appreciate our work. The landlord could boycott the agents after the agents have introduced the tenants to them. And the agents might begin to withhold information from the landlord. And so you now see that both parties are suspicious of each other, that they are trying to cheat themselves, they are trying to extort themselves, or they are not being sincere to themselves. So at the end of the day, you now have this mistrust also between the landlord and the agents. What will happen if landlords begin to see agents as necessary partners, as partners, rather than just necessary evils that they have to just deal with? What will happen? What will the rental market be if agents begins to now have, take on more responsibility from the landlords, like managing their properties? What will the rental market be? What will be the implication of that on the costs or the amount of money that tenants would have to pay to rent these accommodations? So I think we need to professionalize the real estate agency in Nigeria. Do you understand? I really think we need to professionalize the real estate agent. Being a real estate agent shouldn't just be about, I know where a house is, come and pay and, move in and all of that. No. Being a real estate agent, a good agent, should involve more than that. It should involve, things like providing enough value, right, for the market, to the landlord, to the tenant, and, to all the players in the market, such as being somebody who gives, accurate market information to people, who guides the tenants, you understand, who is able to, do proper, valuation of the properties, to not just misguide or, misguide the landlords into increasing rents indiscriminately. That is why I said we need to professionalize the agents, because if we're able to do that, it also has an effect on the reputation. It's capable of making that reputation to be better, because if a professional agent is able to talk about a relationship, once you value relationship, like relationship with the landlord, relationship with the tenant, and with everybody, if a professional agent values that relationship, he's going to behave properly. Do you understand? And so if they're able to behave properly, in a long term, we now begin to have this bad reputation, fizzling out, this bad reputation that they have reducing drastically. And so I think we need to professionalize the real estate agency in Nigeria. An estate agent needs to do more than just connecting the landlord and the tenant, just using the house that the landlord owns. No, an estate agent needs to think professionally, needs to do more, right, than just the transaction. It needs to be value-based, not just transactional-based, right, as it currently is. Because I think once we are able to get to that level where there's professionalism in, the agency business, I think the reputation would increase. And that is going to be good for our housing market. So the real problems with real estate agency in Nigeria is probably not just because we have bad agents, that have created this bad reputation that covers all the agents, including the good ones. Maybe it is because we haven't built the needed environment where the good agents can be able to distinguish themselves from the bad ones. Maybe we need better systems for the agents to operate with. Maybe we need better information. We need, better professional standard, better relationship between the agent and the landlord. You understand? Better relationship between the agent and the tenants. And maybe we need better tools for the people that are doing this work to do their work better. We need better tools for the agents. Because I believe that if we want a better, agency system or rental experience in Nigeria, we shouldn't just ask how can we get rid of the bad agents. That is very, very important. We can't dispute that. We need to get rid of the bad agents. We need to get rid of anybody that engages in bad practices in this real estate agency fees, so that the good guys can have that good reputation that they deserve, so that our housing market can become better for it. And so the agents also have a role to play in talking to their colleagues, you understand, in sharing ideas, in relating and trying to come to a common ground as to how the practices should be. You understand? So that is what I think, that we need better tools for the agents, we need better environment, we need better systems for the agents. And the agents on their own too, they also need better mindset. So I think we need to begin to build that system that, enables us to kind of imbibe in our agents the need to have better mindsets and to do well in their professional practices. You understand? And so with that, we've come to the end of this episode, episode 9, and I want to implore you to subscribe to this channel, follow our pages on social media if you haven't. Now let me leave you with this question. What experience, what horrible experience have you had with a real estate agent so far in your journey of renting an accommodation and all of that? What horrible experience have you had? And what mindset, what unpleasant mindset have you had or do you have regarding real estate agents in Nigeria? Share your thoughts, share your answer in the comments below, and let's keep the housing conversation going. And I'll see you on the next one.